actually used to run a bookstore, and we used Eco Enclosed's mailers for years and years, and we love them so much. So we're really excited about kind of bringing this full circle and learning from all of these specialists in material innovation. So I'm going to pass it over to Ian to introduce the panelists. We're going to have some time to chat a little bit more afterwards, eat some more dumplings, and yeah, so thanks very much for being here.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thanks, Ellie. It's great to see you all. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Huge thank you to Index and Ellie for gathering us all here today. Tonight, we're so lucky. We've got a great 3 panelists here with us who have all, they're really working on the ground, in the weeds, in the algae ponds, bringing these circular innovations to life, doing that inventive, messy, challenging work. And the panel will dive into what it takes to bring a circular product to market, what that work really looks like, and we'll discuss the sort of balance that it takes between like purism and pragmatism that goes into a lot of these decisions. After the panel, we'll open it up to Q&A and encourage you all to stick around afterwards. We hope it's inspiring. We hope you stick around afterwards and meet some cool people and connections and collaborations are formed. So with that, let's get to the panelists. Starting with Scott in the middle. Scott Fulbright is the CEO and co-founder of Living Inc., an innovative biomaterials company that transforms green agricultural waste into carbon-negative pigments and inks. Their algae pigments and inks offer safer color solutions for everything from packaging to textiles, footwear, cosmetics, paints. Am I missing anything?
Whatever. Can you send me what you wrote? That's better than what we did. So, yeah,
ChatGPT.
Now I know. I'll do it when I get home.
The seeds of Living Inc. came during Scott's PhD program at Colorado State, where he was an NSF GRFP fellow and an NSF IGRET bioenergy fellow.
Wow.
Today, Living Inc.
Fancy.
Pretty cool. Today, Living Inc. has collaborated with organizations including Nike, Kathmandu, Patagonia, probably many of you in this room today. Also, often through their partnership with Eco Enclose on non-toxic carbon-negative inks on everything from clothing, printing, hang tags, retail packaging, and beyond. I also want to introduce Dennis Blanco, who is the head of supply chain at the Sway Innovation Company, a clean tech company replacing plastics with compostable materials made from seaweed. Sway's team of designers, polymer scientists are on a mission to replenish the planet by supporting healthy ocean ecosystems, eliminating plastic waste, and creating a more inclusive climate future. Previously, Dennis worked at Bonobos, Care of, and Humankind in product and operations roles, affording him a unique and nuanced understanding of the supply chain needs of Sway's partner brands. Sway is a recipient of the Tom Ford Innovation Prize, an ambitious program to vet and scale degradable alternatives to thin film plastics. And through their partnership with Eco Enclose, Sway has commercialized 2 products, a thin film poly bag from apparel that samples are over there, and we hope you take a brown envelope as you leave. It'll have a Sway sample in it as well as a retail window box being piloted by brands, some of which might be in this room: Florence Marinex, Alex Crane, Faraday, Noah, and others. And finally, Saloni Doshi is the CEO and Chief Sustainability Officer of Eco Enclose, a leading provider of sustainable packaging that has helped over 50,000 e-commerce brands take a step forward on their sustainable journey. Eco Enclose is on a mission to make packaging more circular and regenerative. The organization goes through incredibly rigorous vetting, and it's rough.
Say what you really mean, Ian.
Collaborative supply chain building process with its suppliers to ensure all the packaging is truly best in class. At Eco Enclose, Saloni spearheads R&D and the launch of innovative solutions, including options made with industry-leading levels of post-consumer recycled content and next-gen inputs such as ag waste. Wanted to give those robust intros because everyone's so freaking humble. They won't talk about themselves. They'll be deflecting everything during this panel. But we'll dive into a panel and then open it up after that. But let's start by filling out the picture. Scott, can you tell us a little bit more about what Living Inc. does? How did the company come to exist? And how are Living Inc's pigments different from those in traditional inks?
Yeah, sounds good. I'll grab a couple of things just to show people.
Oh my God, he's got props. He's got props.
Let's see. I was very prepared. I actually brought the samples. I just got to get them from my bag. So what we do is we take biomass waste So let me just grab this real quick. Okay. So my background's biotechnology. And so we started the company trying to make bio-based colorants that were carbon negative from algae. So if you look around you, you see anything that's colorful, that's typically coming from petroleum or chemicals that are mined. And so CYMK was the goal. We can make a bunch of different colors with those colors. I pitched Saloni green many years ago.
Still waiting.
And then we talked to the industry, and they said, do black first, and you'll be very successful because black is used in fashion and packaging. So what we do is we take biomass waste. So this can be from breweries, this can be from algae farms, for example. We take that biomass, we put it through our patented thermal treatment. We make something that's like a biochar. So that's why we have a really good carbon score. And then we turn that powder, that black powder, into pigments that can be used for dyeing fabrics, or we can mix that powder into liquid inks. So this is like a Patagonia handout, that's our black colorant. So instead of using petroleum to make that black colorant, we're using algae waste that typically goes to landfill. So we've done like hang tags with Quicksilver, Patagonia, and then New Balance. Every New Balance product that has this hang tag, which is about 100 million, has our product on there. And then we can do things like bio-based leathers or real leathers. So all this color comes from our pigment, and then we can do shirts. So this is like screen printing ink. So that's my show and tell for the evening. But I do always carry these around just because people go, okay, what is it? And then I show them, they go, oh, that's what it is. So really, what's kind of fun about Living Ink is we're almost becoming like a waste management company. So we go around and you'll talk to a company and they'll say, no, we don't dispose of anything. We feed it to this or we do this. When you really get deep into it, there's a lot of waste. So we're actually going to all sorts of different biomanufacturing facilities. Again, breweries is a big one. We just signed a deal with AB InBev, the group that makes Budweiser. We can help save them money, turn their biomass waste into our product, and then plug it into the supply chain like packaging, for example. So I will summarize it in that we divert biomass from landfills, we make a carbon negative product, we use renewable materials that are grown with agriculture, sugars or sunlight, and then it's a co-branding opportunity, right? And so that's where a lot of brands like working with us is telling stories.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well done.
Dennis. I know, that's
everything. I got nothing else.
Dennis, can you introduce Sway to folks who might not be familiar, but share a little bit more about the company's mission and what are the first couple products you brought to life?
Yeah, for sure. So Sway is a material innovation company that is designing and scaling compostable solutions for packaging. So we are focused on using seaweed as a feedstock. Seaweed is an amazing, regenerative, renewable resource that we're focused on integrating into all of our material formulations. We say that our mission is to replenish the planet from sea to soil. So that means we're using seaweed as a feedstock on the front end and then designing all of our materials to be industrial or home compostable at the end of the packaging's useful life so that it can be returned to soil and help new things, new life grow. Our first product is a film called TPC Flex, which you'll see on that table over there, or maybe you have your own samples as well. But it's a thermoplastic film that we're converting into poly bags for mostly apparel brands, but really any kind of dry, non-perishable good could be packaged in TPC Flex film. And I'm our head of supply, so I'm focused on sourcing seaweed and all of the other raw materials in our ecosystem, working with manufacturing partners who are typically legacy plastic packaging manufacturers who are adopting our material in their processes, and yeah, getting bags made so that we can sell them to Eco-Enclose.
So exciting. And Saloni, can you share a little bit more about Eco-Enclose? How does Eco-Enclose work with brands, and can you speak to Eco-Enclose's role as a converting partner working with innovative material suppliers?
Yeah, I can. Thanks everybody for being here. It's great to have you here. So Eco-Enclose is a packaging company that we say we're on a mission to make packaging truly circular. And for us, the definition of circular for us, or our North Star for circularity, is that we envision a world in which one day packaging would be made out of packaging and becomes packaging again in its next life. and that the raw sort of feedstocks and inputs that go into the packaging that we use are actually regenerative and restorative versus extractive. So that's sort of like the North Star that drives everything we do. And I always think about our business in sort of two parts. I think the main part, like operationally the main part, is that we work with brands of all sizes and we really go deep with them. We take some time to understand like what are their needs? Like what's their sustainability goals? What are their budget needs? What's their operational needs, their functional needs? What's the aesthetic and branding sort of experience they're going for? And then how do we bring them the most circular packaging possible that still meets their needs? That is like the day-to-day of what the vast majority of us and our team does. And then sort of all of that is almost in service to the other part of what we do, which is like how do we achieve our mission, which is like making packaging circular. So we're constantly looking for ways to improve upon recycled content, reusability, recyclability, and then looking for some of the, like what you heard about today, it's seaweed as an input or algae as a replacement for fossil fuels. When we see technologies like that, what is the role that we can play to catalyze their adoption in the marketplace? And I would say like that's the part I think we're going to talk about the most today, and it's the part that is why I do what I do. So
We'll dive into how the sausage is made. Starting with you, Dennis. What exactly are these poly bags made from and how are they made? And also, why seaweed as opposed to all these other bio-based inputs? Why not corn or sugarcane or all the other stuff you can make resins out of?
Yeah, for sure. So the poly bags are made from TPC Flex. TPC Flex is made from TPC, which is our proprietary blend of seaweed and other bio-based inputs, which we combine with a home compostable polymer that is derived from non-renewable resources. So the way we think about V1 of our product is it's essentially our hybrid vehicle, or like our Toyota Prius, where we're still working on the full EV version. We're using some non-renewable inputs to help us get some essential performance and processability attributes that we need to bring our product to market. And yeah, so it all starts with a resin that we produce. That's what the TPC is, and that resin gets extruded into a film. So our whole kind of premise is that we're designing a material that can drop into traditional plastic packaging manufacturing infrastructure. So there's no new equipment required to process suede materials. We're just tapping into the scale that is immediately available in the industry. The reason we're working with seaweed instead of other bio-based inputs is because unlike inputs that are coming from land-based industrial agriculture, seaweed doesn't require any arable land or fertilizer or pesticides or fresh water to grow. And it also can offer some excellent ecosystem benefits to the ecosystem that it's coming from when you're ocean farming. So it offers nitrogen and carbon intake services. It can create employment opportunities for coastal communities that need them. And it can offer habitat to a variety of species that ultimately can help increase biodiversity. So it's a really special feedstock in that way, and that's why we're prioritizing it.
And I'm fascinated by your role sourcing. Like, is it just one farm that you're going to, or how does that work?
Yeah, we have a global network of seaweed processors and farmers that we work with. We're primarily sourcing seaweed polysaccharides from processors, and they are sourcing the raw seaweed biomass from collectives of smallholder farms. We're primarily working with partners in Southeast Asia and South America right now, although we're exploring nearshore opportunities in the USA and Mexico, where the seaweed farming industry is a little more nascent and the processing infrastructure isn't quite as mature as what you find in Southeast Asia. But yeah, working directly with processors, and they're kind of working with those collectives of farmers to get the biomass.
It's incredible. And then where does a collaboration with Eco-Enclose come together? Or like, how does that come together, and what does that relationship look like?
Yeah, so it's been a really tight partnership for the last, 2 or 3 years now? 2 years.
Get rid of us, Dennis.
Yeah, so Sway is a super small team. We're, I think, 7 or 8 full-time people right now. Eco-Enclose really focuses on customer development, customer relationship management, and sales, which would be really difficult for a startup our size to manage. They work with so many different brands, so many different sizes. That enables us to focus on material innovation and production optimization and making our material work. We've run a ton of manufacturing trials together, working with bag converters in Eco-Enclose's network that they've been working with for a long time with other flexible films. And that's helped us validate our material on their equipment, get feedback, tweak our formulation, depending on how those trials go. And Eco Enclose has been a very open-minded and flexible partner that's kind of down to ride the wave of material innovation, which has its ups and downs for sure. Trials don't always go as planned, so yeah.
Saloni, tell us about those ups and downs.
How much time do you got? Yeah, no, I mean, Dennis, you said it really well. Honestly, both of these teams have been amazing to work with. But yeah, like an example. Oh God, you're here, so you're going to see how the sausage is made, right? But I think about we ran a trial of bags back in September for the Sway Innovation Coalition, and that was super successful. And we thought, okay, we nailed it. And what happens is that you think you nail something the one time, and then we went to convert then in December the same sort of line of bags. And what we found is the seam strength in that particular converting line didn't quite meet the strength that we wanted it to. So that's an example where I 15,000 bags in-house, and we're like, oh, these just aren't going to work, which you can imagine how disappointed that was for all of us. That's an example, right, where it's we had one great run, we're like, okay, we thought we got the formula right, and then we work with them, and we're like, okay, we're going to buy a bunch, we're going to get 15, 20,000 bags, and it comes in, and it's that seam strength doesn't work. And what I think, Dennis, and for the same trials and tribulations we've had with Living Ink, you guys are amazing because we can go back to you and we can say, okay, this is what we're finding. What can we do on the resin side? What can we do on the film side? What can we do on the converting side to try to get it right this time? And then, we had a couple iterations, and then in April we were able to release our stock line of Sway bags that had a great seam strength, a great print, everything is working well on it. And you've got a bunch of features that you have to optimize, and with every iteration you find out did you make it? And if not, what do you need to do the next time to make it work?
Incredible. And Scott, how exactly does algae turn into ink?
Oh,
Yeah.
What waste
I've been
streams are you
waiting for this
tapping
answer for a
into?
long time, Scott.
Tell us your secret. No, just kidding. But how does it work?
Yeah, so what we do is we take biomass waste. We add a very small percentage of a proprietary salt mixture to that biomass, and then we put it through the thermal treatment. So again, we're making a biochar, which a lot of people are trying to make right now and kind of dump into the ground to remove carbon. Our mindset is we're making a true colorant that can replace carbon black and can actually enter the supply chain to systematically solve the problem rather than try to kind of use a Band-Aid approach essentially. So when we had this black powder, which is almost like a char, but we're just concentrating that carbon and we're keeping that carbon stable for tens of thousands of years. We can take that powder and we can mix it into liquid inks. So paste inks for hang tags or liquid inks for t-shirts. Most of the inks we make are either vegetable-based inks or water-based inks. So like that Patagonia print, that's a water-based ink, so 70% water, typically around 15% pigments will make that up. And that's kind of how we do it,
And then-
high level.
I love it. And
It always sounds really simple, and then it's every day.
no,
it's
it doesn't.
there's
It does not sound simple
Nothing
at all.
lot of,
about
like,
simple, Scott, don't worry.
a lot of surface chemistry and science, and you look under the microscope and you see different, sizes of particles. There's just a lot of science there, even though it's simple kind of idea.
And then how did that first collaboration between yourself and Eco Enclose come about?
Yeah, I still think about this pretty often right now, but I had an idea to do this. I said, I looked around the world and I said, everything's coated in colors and inks and pigments. And so I thought of this idea. We got a grant from the National Science Foundation. And so they made us call a bunch of potential customers to see if there was actually a solution. They said, we don't want to put any more money into this project until you verify that somebody would be willing to use this. So I called up Kyle, who's the president at Eco Enclose, and I LinkedIn messaged him, and he responded right away. He's not a big LinkedIn message person, but he responded right away, and he said, come over here today, bring your product. I'm like, I don't have a product. I just want to know what you use this. And he's like, his words were we are going to be on the cutting edge of innovation and sustainability, and that's going to be our differentiator. It was just such a clear message. And so I said, I don't have the product. And he said, when you have it, you're welcome to walk into my doors any day. And so I walked into the press room, and I saw Kyle at the little kitchen table when you guys first were going, and he came back there with us, and he poured in the ink into the tray. And we kind of got that thing going, and the job looked okay. It wasn't great, but it did the job for the first brand that we worked with. And so, you know, I'm still looking for that next group that's like, we want to be doing this. We got to be on that cutting edge. We're going to go all in, right? Because it's a very cutthroat industry that's not that open-minded. So I kind of joke that I think Kyle was the second person I reached out to, and I'm like, this is easy, like we got this, you know? And here I am like 7 years later, I'm like, anyone else out there? Anyone want to do this, you know? So the conversations that I get into in the day-to-day of a 0.0001 cents or this or that or that, there's no, like, it's just a collaboration, and Eco Enclosed is like, we're all in on this and we're going to support you guys and we think this is the future and we're going to do it. There's never a conversation. In fact, there's not even really a conversation on even like making the product work, except for new product offerings. But like on a paper materials, we've been very successful. And that's because of just patience and like the bag's not sealing. Like I was in New York City with my wife, and it was like the day before New Year's Eve, and I'm thinking, okay, this is like my one day, my vacation. I'm gonna like be very present. And Kyle's calling me. And he's like, hey, we're trying to pour your ink out and it's not coming out of the bottle. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, we're squeezing it and it's just kind of, it looks like toothpaste. And I'm like, that's not what it's supposed to be doing. And I've always been waiting for like, when does that deal breaker come in these innovation projects? Like when do you hit that point where you can't do it at scale or commercially because of this or that? And we've had those moments where I go, this might be it. And that was one of those moments. Maybe there's a salt with the algae that creates the viscosity problem that you can't use it. And because of Eco Enclosed, we've been able to kind of get through all those different barriers. And I mean, now we work with multi-billion-dollar packaging companies. We work with, you know, big-time brands, and we've been very successful. All started because of Eco Enclosed kind of planting these seeds. So yeah.
Amazing. And can you speak?
And I think, I don't know if I introduced Julia, but I mean, I'm always telling, like, you got to go talk. You got to reach out to Eco Enclosed if you want to try to make a run at this, because you're not going to get into these other groups. They're not going to do it, you know. So yeah.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah.
That's awesome. How about the role of the brand? You've worked with some incredible brands. There's a lot of brand folks here today. Have there been any brand partnerships that have like pushed Living Ink forward in terms of their capabilities or what you're able to pull off? How has that relationship been with some of the brands you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, Eco Enclosed kind of makes it easy for us to work with brands.
It's
You're almost like an enabler, you know? Like, I'm like, this is easy, again. Like, like my sister will send me a picture. Hey, I just got this package from Eco Enclosed with algae ink, right? So that's why we love working with Eco Enclosed. When we work with some of these really big manufacturers across the world and multiple continents, it really does right now rely on the brand to kind of pull it through and to understand what are we talking about here. You know, what I'm learning in this process is that probably no one has weighed a bag before and knows how many grams a bag is, or these kind of basics that maybe we think about on a day-to-day basis. So what I've been working on is giving context, like what's the impact if you use our product? How much product are you using if you're doing 1 million hang tags or 1 billion hang tags? And then what does that kind of convert to in terms of ink or things like that? Because no one has context into these things. And I've been fascinated, like when I see a shirt, like I can tell you how many grams of colorant is used now because I've like done all the backwards calculations and things like that. So trying to give the brands context to make the decision. You know, right now what we're trying to get to is you can use our product, here's the value, and here's the price increase. We're not gonna be cheaper than carbon black. It's basically burning the lowest grade petroleum at 2,000 degrees. We're just not. That's like a very optimized commodity. But when you use our product, you know, sometimes it's hundreds of dollars more. You know, like we just did a project for 3 million hang tags with a fashion brand. And I mean, we sold, I think it was like $200 worth of ink. So for them, they're going, this is a really great, you know, story that we can tell of innovation for a very small price increase. So it's a lot of education between all of us, right, in the supply chain. But brands have a lot of power to say yes or no, or hey, go explore this, and the converters and the factory partners will listen to them. So that's a big part of what we do. In summary, I think of like an innovator, like a Sway or a Living Ink, with a manufacturing partner like an Eco Enclosed with the brand. And so I think of it as a triangle, and I'm always going back and forth, trying to hear what the converter's saying, what the brand is thinking or saying, and trying to help guide that.
That's super cool.
So New Balance was our big one. Like when we got New Balance and we were on like 100 million units, like that was the one where I'm like, okay, we're now globally, you know, anyone that bought something from New Balance probably touched our product. And that was all the brands just kind of being like, we want to do this. So yeah.
Amazing.
I'll just underscore like I'm looking at Lisa from Faherty, and I know Alex Crane. Is anybody from Alex Crane here? Those are two brands that are like the early adopters of the Sway bag, and it's like I can't say enough how like nothing comes to market unless you have a couple brands that raise their hand and say like, yep, I understand this is untested. I understand I might have to pay more. I understand that like this is not the norm and it's not going to work exactly like LDPE, because if it cost the same as much as LDPE and it worked exactly like LDPE, it would already be the norm, right? Like that's why. So you need brands like that that are willing to raise their hand and be the first adopters. And like without that, nothing happens. Like I can't even say enough that like that is how innovation really gets out there.
I've been trying to kind of communicate that. Like at Living Ink, we've got this vision to like turn waste into value. So when you see a tire, 30% of a tire is carbon black, which is a black colorant from petroleum that we replace, right? So we can do concrete, asphalt, tires, right? Those are really like high volume, low price point products. So like when we're doing hang tags, I feel funny sometimes because I carry my hang tags around. I'm like, you see the black on my hang tag here, you know? I'm like, I like rip it off the shirt at the store and I'm like, I got the hang tag, right? That's a go-to-market strategy to tell a story, work with amazing brands that tell stories. There's this huge opportunity, and I'm sure Sway's the same thing. There's huge opportunities there in different markets, so I like to like point that out because it's just the catalyst to kind of get things moving in these innovation spaces.
I love it. Question for all the panelists. Curious about pivots. Have there been any moments where things have gone totally sideways and you've like really had to change your strategy, your product, your attitude? Are there any moments that aren't like that? I don't know. But curious
I
about
mean,
pivots.
I feel like it's a constant series of micro pivots at Sway, at least, but a more significant one. So our first ever product was a water-soluble film that we called First Wave. And our vision in terms of the application that we would use this for was that it would also be a poly bag, as we've done with TPC Flex. But the properties of that film weren't really a great fit. It was basically produced via a manufacturing process that you could describe as artisanal relative to the way we produce TPC Flex, our main product. So it was very expensive and not particularly resilient in a variety of temperatures and humidities that you would expect in a real world supply chain. So in the format of like the film making a standalone bag, it just wasn't really holding up. But through Eco Enclose, we found this product window application. So if you think of like a pasta box that has a clear plastic window on it, we started replacing those with our First Wave film, which was a much more natural fit because even though the film is kind of expensive, you're only applying a little piece of it to each unit, so it's not dramatically driving up your unit cost there. It doesn't have to carry the weight of the entire structure. It's just adhered as a single piece to the paper carton that's doing most of the heavy lifting. And then it leans into a property of First Wave that is unique, which is it's approximately 95% transparent. So for a window, you want it to be clear. It made a ton of sense. So we essentially pivoted to that application and we're able to commercialize something. We're still kind of figuring out exactly where that application is going, but it works a lot better than what we initially thought.
I'll share too. I mean, I love that example because I think it's actually because of Ian. Ian had this great idea of using the First Wave film in that way, and we're like, okay, Julia, let's do it. And then you guys made it happen. So that was amazing. Two things that I'll share that are maybe like less success oriented. I think one I'll share. Eco Enclose is very passionate about. With a move, I think there's like sort of an industry-wide move to move from plastic to paper. You're sort of seeing that a lot. And in that move, we are really conscious of like, how do we help brands do paper right? And for us, that's a combination of things. How do we really push for recycled content? How do we basically make sure that paper sourcing does not put forests at risk, right? Doesn't pose a threat to deforestation. And so we have a number of strategies there. One of the things we're trying to do is to bring ag waste into the world as a replacement for virgin paper, virgin tree-based paper. And so we spent a couple years like really working to like create a wheat straw-based paper line. And like this is the thing I'm very passionate about. I could talk about it for a long time. You guys could be asleep by the end of it. But basically what I found is that the market wasn't really looking for it, right? Brands, when you talk to most brands and when you talk to most consumers, the sentiment is like, hey, hey, paper's fine, it's curbside recyclable, there's nothing wrong with it. You know, I think the narrative on plastic is we all know that we need to replace plastic. You don't have that same narrative with paper. And so after a couple years, like we just weren't finding the market demand. So I'll say like that's something we had to scale back and be like, we can't keep doing this if there's no demand. And thankfully Ian's gonna help us bring it back to life. But you know, it's been a couple years in the making. And then another thing I'll share is our reusable, you can see back there's like a Armoire reusable mailer. Maybe it was 2.5 years ago, we launched like a reusable, re-enclosed mailer. When at a time where I think everyone was like, reusable is the future. It basically, we launched it, there was a lot of brand excitement, and if you think about it from an ecological standpoint, that reusable mailer needs to be used, depending on what you're replacing, like 8 to 20 times in order for it to have a better carbon and environmental footprint than the single-use mailer it's replacing. And what we were finding is that either brands weren't comfortable reusing the mailer a certain amount of times because it sort of gets scuffed up and they don't want to use something that looks sloppy, or consumers weren't returning it, or the business model wasn't working. And so that was another thing where we're like, oh, we put a lot of bets on that. We thought that was going to be a big part of the future. And what we realized is like, it's going to be a small slice of the future in the world of e-commerce. And it's going to work for brands where returns are baked into their business model, but it's really not. It's not going to be the end-all be-all solution. It's going to be one of many menus of options. So those are two examples where like we learned, and we really had to like either de-invest or change how we were investing in the material. I think there's still a place for both of those things, but we really learned how to do it right. So.
Amazing. Can you all speak to sort of balancing these incredible environmental benefits that your companies and your products have, carbon sequestration, home compostability, with the real business needs of the brands and clients you work with? Do you have any advice for all of us in this room for speaking the language of the C-suite, getting products actually out into the world at scale beyond just sort of small one-offs?
Can I talk about my pivot?
Oh, sorry. I cut off your pivot. No, we
this kind of goes
with
with
pivot.
He's like, I was prepared for the other
there's like
question.
19 pivots. I'm like, I think I got one.
Yeah, we would love to
No,
hear.
I just relate it to like sustainability, right? Like, I think how you started, like pragmatic innovation, right? Like, I think that like, I don't know. Like, I come from the biotech world where we say we can grow anything, right? You look around you, like we can grow it, right? I mean, I was in that world in like 2015, 2016, and I'm like, and I still believe in it. But then you like start getting into the world. Like I would call up Sun Chemical, like a huge ink company, and I'd like talk to them, and I'm like, they don't want to hear about my colorant that's gonna fade. That's not what they do. They don't make ink that fades over time. So we can sit there in a kind of like little community and say, it's okay, like designers will use our fading pigments because that's how it should be, and it's circular, and like they don't want to use ink that fades, you know. And it was so clear that like that's not what ink was developed for. Ink was developed to like stay for a long time, to tell stories and communicate things. So that was where we had this pragmatic view. Like when we met Saloni, we were kind of doing green and yellow and orange inks. We can still do that. There's just performance characteristics. Like it's going to fade when exposed to UV light. I printed something almost 10 years ago that is still beautiful green on my desk because it's not exposed to light. The same way that UV light can mess with our DNA and cause skin cancers, the same way it breaks things down that are typically biomaterials are a little bit easier to break down. So trying to hit that performance. The other thing that was, so my point is that we had all these colorants that we grew in our laboratory. It's such a great story. Like we'd have the news cameras coming in going, tell us how you're growing the future. And I'm sitting there going like, I don't know if it's gonna work at scale, you know? And then we went to the manufacturers that were growing our algae, and then we're like, what's that huge pile over there? And they're like, that's our waste. And I'm like, what do you mean your waste? And that's when I realized that we could get something for a much cheaper cost, and we could develop a technology that would actually check all the boxes of performance. So that's the first step in the door, is like, no one wants to work with you, except for Eco and Close, if it doesn't work.
Because we know it will work eventually.
Exactly. You get it to work with Eco and Close, then you can, okay, we checked that box, that was easy, right? And so, you know, making it work is number one. But you know, what I'm learning right now is getting the inroads with sustainability. We were just at Circularity, some of us in Denver. And it's like, again, it's like a little bit of that community, right? Where like you talk to someone, they're like, I love you, I love your product, this is amazing, we're gonna do it. And I'm like, you're sustainability, we gotta like take it to the next step. And that's typically product development or product line management or just kind of the real commercial group. So the thing that we're really doing in terms of the business needs is understanding like who wants to work with us. I don't really wanna work with anyone who doesn't wanna work with us. If your brand is all about sustainability and innovation, then we wanna work with you and you should wanna work with us. If you're not on that early adopter curve and you're more on that laggard side of things, then we'll talk to you in a couple of years. So really trying to highly qualify these groups and also speak their language, right? So we always ask questions like, what are your goals? If your goal is about carbon and diverting like biomass from landfills, we're your solution. You know, if you want something else, we're probably not your solution, and that's okay. So really trying to like qualify and speak the language of these groups, but also just laying it out there. Like we worked with New Balance, and I kind of had this aha moment. Like I think of them as one company, but when you get into footwear and apparel and packaging, they don't even know each other, right? So like being able to send a presentation saying, here's the 9 projects I've worked on with your team, here is the impact, and here's the potential impact, and everyone should be proud of this work. Getting that and kind of having people pass that around was really powerful, because everyone goes, oh wait, you already know people here, you're already in the door, oh, you actually add impact, you help me tell the story that I can tell my colleagues, has really been high impact for us, and we're still trying to like distill it down into one simple slide, for example, which is difficult, but speaking the language and understanding their goals is the number one thing.
Love it.
I'll just like a little bit on, oh my God, don't yell at me. You hate when I talk about it. But you know, like you talked about early adopters and laggards. Like I think that's like key to this a little bit
Everyone's
of like.
an early adopter as well.
Yes. This idea, like, you know, there's a technology adoption curve for any new technology, and that is true in materials innovation as well. And you've got like the early part of the technology adopters, which are the early adopters, the innovators, and then as they sort of prove and pave the way, you can make way for the folks that come behind until you've got like, you know, one day your Amazons and your Walmarts come on board. But I do think like even within a brand that is an early adopter, you tend to chunk it out of like the first people who adopt are like the sustainability marketing people that are like, yeah, I'll just take 5,000 units. Or I'll do like a pilot run, an LTO run of this. Yeah. And then they are like, oh, wow, this works. And then they market it and they're like, there's good feedback. And then you start to expand. So like even within your early adopter brand, there's like departments that tend to be earlier adopters and do it at small scale and start to tell the story. And if that story gets traction and then they prove that the material actually works, then you can start to move it into some mainstream supply chain. But a lot of like chunking it out that way and a lot of patience.
Absolutely.
Here's where I think the challenge is in this. And this is where like we have a challenge. If anyone's got solutions, I'd love to talk afterwards. You know, you find an advocate within a brand that understands the story, they see the product passes. Like I've been on emails with like marketing teams that are supposed to tell this story, and there's like major disconnects. So why is anyone going to pay a little bit more for something where they don't understand the story or it's not communicated? Because, you know, there's a disconnect between the storytelling I find sometimes and the work that gets done internally. And I think if we can as a community like kind of connect that a little bit more, I think there's value there. But I don't think there's value there if the story gets completely missed or it's a completely botched story, for example, which Devin, you know, really helps. My teammate Devin helps kind of like brands tell that story. Here's what you can say, here's what you can't say, and trying to keep that consistent. But yeah, that's the challenge we have right now is like, we get to procurement and they're like, 4% increase? Why? And I'm like, but there's value, you know? Like
Absolutely. How are you finding the cost conversation with the brands around Sway? Or is that sort of you're worrying about sourcing? That's like not your
it's
program.
more of a Julio conversation. I mean, we're targeting being on par with bio-based alternatives like PLA and paper. There's definitely a premium associated with Sway, especially at this stage where we're turning a corner between pilot scale production and full commercial scale production. Everything's still happening at a fairly small scale. We have some really concrete ways that we're going to be bringing down cost over time. One of those is working with less refined seaweed inputs. Fewer processing steps means less cost. Just overall improving the efficiency of our production and reducing the scrap that gets produced is huge. And yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, I'm often not in the room with the actual brands having those conversations, but would just echo that it's like, it's all about the big picture. It's all about the full story. It's about emphasizing seaweed and kind of this bigger vision that we have, and not necessarily the very practical, granular, you know, packaging attributes.
And I'll say, like, we are oftentimes the one in the room. Like, I will say we start with the cost when it comes to Sway, not as much with Living Ink, because I think what's interesting about Living Ink is even though gallon by gallon it's more expensive, like it represents a really small part of the cost of the packaging. And so we actually at Eco Enclosed can absorb that. You know, with Sway, it's like that is the material. And so actually we just start the conversation, and it's pretty honest. Like, hey, if this is not going to work for you, like you're not one of the early adopters, we'll call you in a year or two when we've gotten this to more cost parity. And it's just like good to get that over with right away, so nobody's getting their time wasted. And then you sort of like, you do isolate the brands that are like, yeah, I understand that innovation is more expensive because it hasn't achieved scale, and I'm ready for this conversation. So it's a little bit of like good to be blunt and in front of it, and then you start to separate out the right brands to be talking to.
Love it. And on the sourcing, it's like seaweed is really having its moment in supplements and kelp burgers and this, that, and whatever. What are you doing to like ensure that the sourcing is really well vetted and you're not, for lack of a better comparison, like ending up with something that has a deforestation risk or overstraining risk?
Yeah, I mean, seaweed farming is essentially very sustainable, but as we scale, if it's managed poorly, it could definitely kind of follow some of the pitfalls of industrial land-based agriculture. You know, we don't want to create monoculture, aquaculture. We want to make sure that those ecosystem benefits that we talk about with seaweed farming, you know, are actually happening. You're preventing marine waste and other plastic waste. That's kind of a full circle idea with Sway from, you know, entering these ecosystems. So we've developed a pretty extensive supplier vetting process that all of our potential sources go through. Even at the, you know, if we're just sampling material for the first time, we run them through this so that we can get a better understanding of where the seaweed comes from, how it's processed, and make sure all of those boxes are checked. And even if they're not all checked, you know, at this stage, we at least know where the hot spots are and we know how they need to improve over time, and we can give them that feedback and make sure that we're kind of helping the industry develop in a way that's aligned with our values.
One final question before we open it up to Q&A. Just curious if you, three of you, have any advice for the crowd on how you balance this idea of like purism versus progress or pragmatism versus idealism. How do you like hold space for that person who was probably very idealistic when you started this company or this pursuit a decade down the line with knowing all that you know now? How do you balance both of those visions?
I'm going to talk about the first time we did the 10,000 box run on Bedrock. Bedrock was like one of the early adopters who was like, yeah, I'm all in on algae. Like right now they use it on all of their boxes and all of their packaging basically, I think, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, hopefully we called you about this. Anyway, we're like, we're printing boxes and it's coming out like toothpaste.
Yeah.
It's coming out like toothpaste. And we're sitting, you know, we're like adding the additives that need to be added. And then finally Kyle's like, well, we need to get this out tomorrow. And so we are going to add some regular black ink, right? Like we also print with black ink. And it ended up being like a 70%, 30% like mix. And we called Bedrock and they knew exactly what we were doing. And their comment was like, listen, I'd rather have some algae ink than zero algae ink. And it was like, that to me was like, their response was so matter of fact and so engaged in like making this work that to me it was like exactly what you need from brands, but also exactly like what you need to be willing to go through, which is like, I'm not giving you 100% algae ink, I'm sorry, but I'm giving you 70% algae ink, and hey, you as a brand are helping to make this right. And then the next 100,000 boxes we did for them were 100% algae ink. Like that to me is like such a good symbol of how we think about this work, which is like, we want a future where all black is living ink, basically. That's what I want. That's my future. And like, how do you get there? And it's like, you don't get there by waiting for it to all be perfect. You get there by like taking the step you can take that's in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, at Sway, our mantra has become progress, not perfection, which has helped keep us sane. I mean, our initial idea was, okay, our first product is going to be 100% bio-based. It's going to be like this perfect, ideal material that we envisioned when Julia and Matt started the company. You realize as you start running production trials that maybe that's not the most realistic way to get to market. So I think it's just been about having a spirit of incrementalism and celebrating the little wins and partnering with organizations like Eco Enclose or like our blown film extrusion partner, Charter Next Generation, that already are operating at scale has been such a good way for us to kind of bring the dream closer to reality quickly, like dropping into their systems. We're like, oh my gosh, we can run 600 pounds of film an hour with our partner. Like, we never thought that would be possible anytime soon. So really helps expedite things.
My take would be like to talk to the end users and know what they want and what they expect in an ideal world, and then kind of work backwards from there and work with those people that are willing to do that, right? From a manufacturer to mix the ink. Sometimes some people would have said, no, we don't do that. We can't, whatever. So just that open-minded early adoption. But like, you have to know what you're working towards. It's not going to be that for maybe many years, right? But like, what are we trying to get to? Like, I used to call up the ink companies, and I used to call up big brands before I even knew what ink was. And I'm like, what are your expectations here? And just to like learn what I'm trying to go for. But like, we did a project, again, kind of like an open-minded group. We did one of our first projects in footwear we did was with Nike. But it was with their innovation group called ISPA. And it's called like improv adaptation. It's just like this, like, I know one of the 4 words, improv. But their whole mentality was just like, we're not Nike. We can do things differently. We can take risks. And we gave them a product that was not dialed in. And I was like, it's going back to like perfection. Of being like, we're not going to send it until it's perfect. And they said, just send it. We're gonna make it work. So you can see one of the first shoes we ever did with Nike. They just took a shoe, it's like a slip-on shoe, and they literally just like dumped it all over the shoe. Because they're like, it's not gonna go through the screen, it's not gonna go through the sprayer, and they're just like, and I'm just like, who would have thought Nike, of all people, would do that? But it was that core group of people that were just so innovative and driven to do it. So finding those people that have the drive, that are like, I want to do this, that are open-minded as your first groups that you talk to and do it with is like so critical. Because I remember just being like, we made a shoe with Nike, and I'm like, it wasn't pretty, but like.
That's awesome. Well, how about a round of applause for our amazing panelists? Thank you all so much. Would love to open it up for conversation. We'll take a few questions before we break out. It's always tough to ask the first one. Yeah, all right.
Dana.
Please.
Yes, so you mentioned where the brands could be first movers. So how much opportunity do you see with this move by actually most of the world and even some U.S. states towards carbon pricing? So as one of the writers, those with Clean Tech, they say is that once you stop treating the atmosphere as an open sewer, then these fossil products would be quite expensive compared to algae or other bio-waste products. So to what extent do you see opportunity there that's going to help mainstream these bio-waste products?
Your policy.
I guess so. I will say we are existing in a time where we have like maybe competing tailwinds and headwinds on the policy front, because I think you've got some headwinds right now. Is probably, it's like between tariffs, and there's so many factors that are causing brands to have to actually cut costs as much as possible. So they're thinking very short term, very immediately about like what are ways that they can cut costs, and environments like that don't necessarily lend themselves to investments in innovation. On the other hand, you have some tailwinds, which I would say there are certain aspects of extended producer responsibility that are leading to that. There's some initial conversation around carbon pricing, though I think that's still more conceptual for brands. You're seeing some conversation around like truth in labeling as well. So you are seeing some brands start to be like, what is the impact that these, I would say tailwind policies are having? I do think some of the tailwind policies are still, like, brands are still sitting in compliance versus action. Like, they're still sitting in that muck of like, all I care about is getting the data and reporting the data. They haven't yet been figuring out like, what does it mean in terms of their fees, and will innovation and positive progress actually reduce their fees enough? So I think some of the policy tailwinds are still maybe a couple years away from having an immediate impact on positive sourcing, but it's sort of there. And I think the hockey puck's going there, while we're right now in a landscape of like more and more brands are actually saying like, this isn't my year for innovation. And so we're having to do a little bit more like finding the needle in the haystack to find the brands that want to go forward. So not like the most optimistic message, but I will say that in that landscape, when I talk to a brand that's like, yeah, I'm all in, I'm doing this anyway, I just like want to hug them. And I'm like, it's brands like you that are going to help pave the way for the future, because they still are out there. So.
Please.
First off, thank you for your honesty and for the work that you're all doing to continue to push the industry forward. I'm curious, in the space of innovation, and that EcoEnclosed is always willing to kind of take these risks, but the conversation around investment And so do we see that the investors are requiring the brands to say, yes, we're going to adopt this, or are the investors willing to say, hey, we're going to take this leap of faith because we believe that algae ink or seaweed is the future, and like how could we all go back into our, whether it's a brand or kind of then help kind of push the investment along?
Yeah, I mean, I feel strongly about this right now. So in 2008, I worked at a biofuels company. I worked at a couple biofuels companies where there's a lot of money put into those businesses. It's called the Clean Tech 1.0. And it kind of went up and then it kind of went down for many reasons. And there was kind of Clean Tech 2.0, which maybe we're in or maybe we're in 3.0. The thing where I think investors have completely lost faith is that if you build it, they will come. Because there's been a lot of groups that have built it and no one came. And so this is where like I do put this on the brands quite a bit, where like there has to be some kind of commitment. So if you like a technology or there's a solution that you're looking at, there has to be a forward-looking commitment of some sort. It doesn't have to be today or even this year, but just something that says, you know, for us at Living Ink, we're like, hey, we'll hit your performance, we'll hit your cost, and we'll hit the whatever volume you need in the next 5 years, but you've got to kind of commit here. Now, if we don't hit performance or we can't scale, then you don't owe us anything. It's a very low risk thing to ask for, you know, but it has to happen for companies like us to really scale globally and build out manufacturing, which is going to take tens of, you know, potentially more millions of dollars, right? So I think that brands, you know, without that commitment, a lot of innovation companies are not going to succeed and actually make an impact, I don't think. And I'll say that too in the manufacturing space too, right? We're starting to see manufacturers step up a little bit more, saying we want to do this. But in the end, I would say 95% of the manufacturers that I talk to, they just listen to the brand. And they're like, until a brand tells me to talk to you, I'm not going to talk to you. So the power that you have at a brand to just say, hey, give me a quote for algae ink. It literally, it stimulates things, right? So there's a lot of power there in a very low risk thing to just ask for a Sway bag or an algae ink print.
And I'll just add both Living Ink and Sway have done a really nice job because their technology is designed to like work on existing equipment. So they have like they're building business models that don't require like massive infrastructure investments in order to work and to scale. There's pros and cons to that, right? It means that like we almost like are forced to now create material innovation that works with an entire infrastructure that we've designed around fossil fuels, which sort of sucks, but that's the reality we live in, and I think you guys have done a really nice job. It means your money, like the investments you're taking, are so much more efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for us, being able, like establishing relationships with legacy manufacturing partners has been so much easier, been made so much easier by having brands and organizations like Eco Enclosed kind of pulling that demand. So yeah.
In the back. Oh, sorry.
No, the one thing I'll say on the brand thing, this is what I think about every day. If you're a brand, like, just go like, I want to know how much, you know, like if I want to do 1 million prints or bag, whatever, just what's the cost difference? Just ask that question. I'm on so many emails where there's numbers and percents and things. It's my product and I'm like, I don't even know what that means, you know? So when you talk about the cost of ink and you go, we're 2x the price, right? Head to head, if you look at per gallon. I'm also talking about projects right now about doing 5 million units, and it's like a $4,000 price increase if you look at it from a price delta. So I sit there going like, we're gonna jump on like 4 more calls, and we're gonna spend all this time, and our time is money, and we're talking about $4,000 here. So as a brand, get into your manufacturer and be like, what is the price difference? I just wanna know what the number is. And get that one number and then look at the value and kind of wait, that's what we need to be talking about.
Yeah, just adding on to your thing on the value side, because I think people talk more about value and pricing, but you spoke about the challenge with even a small number, but how do you communicate this on a bigger scale, value proposition, because money is important, but how do you convey the story that is a lot of the value? What is the main challenge that you face? Because that's clearly you spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's a sustainability value, you know? I mean, and then I'll say in the policy question, the state of New York and the state of New Jersey were looking at bills last summer that would ban carbon black from all of packaging, which would be a wild regulation to pass. It would change a lot, right? So just because of that bill, we get manufacturers reaching out to us saying, hey, whether it happens next year or in 5 years or 10 years, 10 years is not that long, really, you know? So they're already thinking about that. So there's enough, that regulation is enough to get people to kind of like wake up and start doing things. In the end, we're sustainability value. You know, if you look at this like Quicksilver hang tag, it says like this is printed in algae ink coming from waste. I mean, there's a really cool story, and I think that group was really happy that everyone that touches their product gets this sense that they're on that cutting edge. They're turning algae, which is a surf brand, into inks. So you know, that's the value, is really that sustainability story. Now, there are groups in the early adopter category that do want the real metrics. How much carbon did we really save? How much biomass and petroleum did we save? Because they have internal goals or sometimes external goals. So that is some of the value that we can provide at Living Ink, is you tell us how much product you want to use of ours, and we'll give you all of those metrics that you can talk about publicly or internally. And so, I mean, our goal really in the end is to be price parity, so that we don't even need to have that conversation. We just have to scale. And I think that, you know, I think that's the reality of it. You know, what I'm trying to get to right now is 1% or 3% or 5%, what's acceptable? And in a lot of groups, it's just 0%, you know, and that makes it challenging for innovators. But that's why you got to find the right group at the right time.
And within that early adopter set, you start to like, you don't want to, if you're one of the brands who's like built your whole brand and ethos around transparency and sustainability and innovation, you also don't want to be like the 100th brand in that set to adopt Sway or Living Ink. So I think both Living Ink and Sway have done a really nice job sort of doing like education, broad education, right? Like around the innovation that they're bringing to market and why it's so great. And so I think there's something interesting there of like, oh shit, at some point, like a brand that considers themselves in that early adopter cutting edge set has to be like, I gotta be part of this, otherwise I'm gonna be left behind, and no longer does my brand stand for what I say it stands for. So I think in some ways there's the value there. And that only happens when the innovator has like told some of the end story that you guys have done a really nice job on.
Yeah. And I'll keep talking about pricing.
Okay.
The other thing I'll say is, like, we are the innovator. Eco Enclose is the manufacturer. The price is usually not a conversation because they're taking this small amount and covering that. I think what we're seeing globally is we're seeing manufacturers that will like mark our product up big time because they've been beaten down for years by brands, and they say, oh, now's my chance to get this really premium product that's sustainability. So I look at projects sometimes where I go to the brand and I say, hey, what was the price difference? And then they'll tell me, and I'm like, are you like serious? Like, I'm gonna sell $200 worth of ink and they're trying to charge a $30,000 upcharge on that? So that's where, again, going back to that triangle, and really like, you know, when I entered this industry, it was like, don't share pricing, don't share volumes, that's everybody's business. Like, I'm a little bit over that now, and I'm just gonna say, here, you know, hey, so-and-so brand, I'm selling $300 worth of product, you gotta talk to your manufacturer about this, you know? And so with like one of the big apparel brands, we actually sent a spreadsheet. We're like, here's how much ink goes on a shirt, here's the price of our ink, it's a 4 cent per unit, there should be nothing more than that for a shirt. And actually, that tool right there got the manufacturer to come down, but it took time and energy, you know?
All right, we'll do one more. Yes.
I'm working on mostly on the textile innovation side, and I had a specific question on your product. If it's pigment, ink, dye stuff based, I work a lot with digital printers, as well as the manufacturers of the machine. So I'm really curious about your technology.
Yeah. You want me to bring it back to pricing now? So we work with a couple different digital ink companies. Digital ink, just so you know, everybody, like screen ink, you jam it through a screen. When you print hang tags, it's like basically a big stamp that stamps it down. Digital ink, it's shooting out of the little nozzles, right? So basically it comes down to particle size, which we've been able to get our particle size small enough. Now we have to do that consistently between batches and get the cost down there. So we've seen good results with some of the digital ink companies. The challenge is it's a little bit like the HP model, right? Where you buy an HP printer and then you have to use HP ink. So a little bit of that go-to-market strategy is more challenging. The number of times I've heard Indigo, like, do you have Indigo? Can you do Indigo? I'm like, that's HP's ink that they sell for their HP Indigo machines. So it's a little bit higher technology and it's a little bit harder go-to-market strategy. But we do know HP, we know a lot of those big ink companies, and we're in talks with them. It's just a matter of prioritization. The thing is that with the manufacturing partners or even the big ink companies, they'll move and they'll do things, they're interested in it. if they can get a brand behind it, then it really moves quick. So that's where we've seen, like, we get one brand and it's just like we're off to the races, and we know what the end goal is of this development project versus an open-ended innovation project of like, if this works, what do we do with it and who wants it and things like that. But
So
yeah.
for textiles, for the apparel side, are you able to do rotary, or are you able to actually dye fabric? Is it a pigment or is it a change?
Yeah, so we provide a dry powder, which is a pigment. We also do a liquid dispersion, which is a color concentrate. And then we also sell like finished inks. So those are the three main categories. Pigments, we're starting up the supply chain typically, selling that raw material. This we sold the dispersion. This is a golden goose shoe. So we provided the liquid dispersion, and then the tannery did all the finishing of this here. And then in terms of like dyeing, we've dyed natural fibers. We've done some dope dyeing with a couple partners. And we actually just launched last week with AGI Denim a black denim product for jackets and jeans.
Cool.
So that's now in the market technically.
Technically.
As
With
opposed
that,
to publicly.
we'll wrap up the panel. How about another round of applause for our panelists? And thank you all for being here tonight. Please stay as long as you like, and make sure you grab a bag with a Sway and algae ink
make sure you
sample
grab
on the
all
way
the
out.
samples on the way out.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you so much. That was really great.
No,
Yeah,
we just met with Gary. Well, my brother is here. You want to go meet my brother?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Hi, how's it going? Oh, no, I'm Saloni. Very nice to meet you. Oh, for me, no, I'm just going to say hi to my brother. He's going to be
Charlie, oh, great to see
I'm going
you
to say
in
hi to
person.
Yeah, how are
coming.
you?
Looking forward
Thanks
to
for
tomorrow.
coming. I thought it would be over more quickly than.
How's it going, guys?
I'm Scott.
You're in that
Scott.
world. You're at
Are
this
you
very
actually
Are you in the city then? You've been to Colorado? A little bit?
Yeah.
It looks like it. We're
all the time, so I've been out there a little
collaborations.
less recently, but I try to go and
Well, a good excuse to get together. I'm in Connecticut.
Totally.
I wasn't.
remember your first idea was the bike helmet. That's like, okay,
Which is interesting since I run the company. It's actually kind of
Nice to meet you.
actually, I
Dennis.
remember all these kites
Nice to meet you.
What are you doing in the city?
I work in media and technology for the last 20 years. So I
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's interesting. So I'll say, like, Eco and Clone as a company has really focused on recyclability and recycled content. So that's actually our core. We really have embraced Sway because of the importance of seaweed, like the need to replace fossil seaweed. So I always say, like, 90% of the environmental impact of a package has nothing to do with end of life. It's all like the feedstock, it's the manufacturing of it. And so even if all that's Sway ends up in the landfill, you've had an incredibly beneficial impact on the planet
we want everyone to have access to kind of the proper.
Just a long way to
exactly.
The sort of complementary polymers that we're working with are already certified as compostable.
So you actually like don't want things to decompose in the landfill. If it ends up in the landfill, you want it to stay stable. Because if it decomposes in the landfill, it creates methane and it's not very good. And so, in fact, it's likely true that Sway, like paper, if it went into the landfill, might decompose more quickly than plastic, but that's not a thing. So we don't want that to happen.
oh my gosh,
Our communications team at Eco and Close, like distribution
You
partners
ideally
like
want it to
that.
be composted,
It's a
but again,
huge
like,
part of
no
what
matter
we're
what
doing
happens,
is
that end
not
of life
just
is like 5 to 10% of the environmental impact. So even if it's designed for composting,
He's always mentioned the environment or like infrastructure
and I'm so impressed.
because right now, you know, we're only like a third of the country has access to industrial composting.
yeah, so like if it ends up in a compost, it's like it's a better
Nice to meet you as well.
If it ends up in a landfill, it's like not optimal, but you still have like a huge benefit. 90% of the product, the benefit is still the same. And then if it ends up in the natural environment more than it will decompose, so the good thing is if it leaks into the natural environment, it might decompose in,
Organic,
a couple of years.
It's not great scenario.
So I would say, like, in general, we are so focused on end of life as a conversation, but in reality, the science is like the end of life is such a small sliver of the environmental impact we have to be thinking about.
But it's
everything
not
else.
as simple as like, oh, it's like
Fulbright, my last name, FUL.
If you say it's like an orange peel degrading, that's actually not graded in a landfill either.
You know what? You're the first person who's ever mentioned that. I don't know enough about avocado
it's
farming.
It's not the ideal end of life scenario. It is a likely end of
We did
life
research
scenario in the near term that we have to sort of reckon with, and that's where that
Yeah, closed down about a year ago.
printing on the back, saying exactly what we should be doing with this.
I can take a picture.
And we're also trying to get people to reuse the poly bag as like a compost bag for their compost bin, like a liner. So kind of give it that dual purpose or dual life.
As long if you're not able to get value from it. So if you're a brand that can't get value from it,
Never
then
thought
that's
about that, but you're spot
that's
on.
still-
Are you a designer or are you
storytelling. Yeah. And it's a bummer. And I think like in 5 years that won't be the case anymore. But if there's a brand that's like, I want to line up and use it today, I think they have to be able to get
So you guys are so cool.
brand
Let me
value
show
from
you
it
something.
to make it a cost difference with it.
You probably don't even know who this is. Hey, I'm Ian, by the way.
You can just like throw on the ground and it'll be like an apple
This came up on my Instagram like 8 years
Like UV
ago.
light fastness kind of deal.
Anyway, it's some random, when I was a grad student, I went up to your farm, just like just north of New York. You guys loaded me up with agricultural waste, and we were dry pressing it into food packaging trays. From just like the actual stuff in your restaurant compost.
Yeah.
So the black
It was gnarly, just doing these crazy
UV light
dry
fastness.
presses. And we built like a mushrooming system around it.
I
Exactly,
mean,
it is
we want to tell the seaweed story. Seaweed story is so powerful, and it's so important. And it's like taking a fossil fuel and replacing it with seaweed.
I always remember you guys. You guys were the only farm. I was like, yeah, come on up, take what you want. This is what we're doing.
And
Yeah,
that
it's
is,
cool.
so important to like get people behind that story. And I think that some brands will companies will
How do you pitch your investors for like customers and working with them?
Well, I'm not one of the founders, but mostly work
Yeah.
with
But I would love like if you can connect me and tell me the story and watch it.
Oh, sure, yeah.